Hey everybody! Today I'm going to show you a very fun and quick way to add some glittery hearts to a simple watercolor wash background. I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper that's taped down to my mat, and I'm just going to add some water to it. I'm going to do a very abstract watercolor background. So I want this nice and wet because I want the colors to run together. And I'm using my Brusho powdered watercolor here, just in an ice cube tray. That's how I keep the colors separate. And a little bit of Brusho goes a long way. So I just leave these partially used pigments in the ice cube tray, and it's easy for me to reactivate them and reuse them over and over. I like these particular watercolors because they're very, very saturated. So you can see as I add this red how fun it is when it just moves around the page. I love it when that happens. You never know what's going to happen with watercolor. That's what makes it so fun. I'm using just basic colors here, just a red, a purple, a turquoise, kind of a Kelly green, and then a yellow. You can see I use a lot of yellow, and so I'm kind of out of it. I need to add a little bit more here because that's always the last touch that I do, and it adds a lot of warmth and fun. So once I have just, kind of looks like a hot mess right now, but it'll look good in a minute, I promise. Once I have that the way I want it, I'm going to go ahead and take my heat gun and I'm going to hold it really, really high up above the page. You can't actually even see it at first. But this really helps me not move the wet color around too much and just dry the color where it is. Now where the color pools, you get some fun hard edges, as you'll see in the green at the top and the blue at the bottom. And I actually really like this effect. But I like holding it high up because it'll dry the whole thing at once without really influencing what has happened with the watercolor on the paper. Now this is our Stampin' Up! Hearts and Stars decorative mask, and you might be stressed out right now because you can see that I cut it in half. But there's a good reason for that. We're using half stencils at my retreat for a very fun technique. And so I have a bunch of them cut in half. So don't be sad. There are more where these came from, and they're very inexpensive. Now I'm using some golden molding paste. I love everything that Golden makes. I think they make a super high quality product. They also do great demos. If you ever get a chance at an art store near you to go to a Golden demo, I highly recommend it. I'm using just a metal palette knife to scrape the molding paste across my stencil. You've probably seen this a million times before, but it's fun. It's kind of magic. Adds a little bit of texture and no color, but it's perfect for little delicate stencils like this heart stencil. And it's sort of like frosting a cake. I'm not much of a baker. Janet Wakeland can tell you that. We don't bake down here in Texas. It's too hot to bake. But this is the equivalent of baking for a Texan or anybody who lives in a very warm environment. I can still feel like I'm frosting a cake if I'm using molding paste. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you put your palette knife into the water just so you can get the molding paste off easily. And clean your stencil quickly. That's what I like to do. This will dry pretty fast, and you want to make sure that you can use your stencil again. Now while the molding paste is still wet, I'm going to take some iridescent ice embossing powder. This is everybody's favorite, right? Everybody loves a little bit of sparkle, plus the magic of embossing powder. And I'm just going to add this to all of the hearts. And since the embossing powder is sort of the same color as the molding paste, just make sure you have the whole thing covered. Make sure that every heart has some glittery embossing powder on it. And the other reason that you really want to dry your watercolor before you do this is if you don't, the embossing powder will also stick to your watercolor and won't give you this nice, clean, defined look that this stencil has. So take the time to do that step. It really helps. Now when you have them all covered, all the little hearts are glittery, you want to set this aside to dry. Not all the way. You want to emboss it before it's completely dry, but you want it to be somewhat dry. You can see from the extra on my mat that it's thicker paste, and so it's still a little bit wet and it's sticking to my fingers. But when I touch the hearts, because I've let it dry probably 15 minutes, that it is mostly dry but still clinging to the embossing powder, and that's what you want. So then I just use the magic of television to heat emboss this. I've noticed that it does take a little bit longer to melt the embossing powder when it's on the molding paste. So just be patient and make sure you watch for that transformation that happens with the embossing powder. And make sure that they're all completely embossed before you turn your heat gun off. And now you have a fun, sparkly, three-dimensional heart background on your watercolor wash that you can turn into a fun, simple card. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching.